Every decision you make ought to be God's choice, not yours. My life's decisions ought to be God's, not mine. I went forward that night, knelt on my knees, got on my knees, and said, Lord, I'll do whatever you want. And you know the thing I was scared to death of? I was afraid God was going to call me to be a preacher. You know why? I was scared to death to get up in front of people. I thought, first of all, what would I say for all that time? And now my wife's thinking, boy, you got over that really fast, didn't you? Greatest joy of my life has been serving the Lord. I want to close in Psalm 37, if you would go there with me. Psalm 37. See, sometimes we've heard these stories about, man, I'll tell you, missionaries come in and they talk about, we pay $15 for a box of cereal. Well, $8 or whatever it is, you know. And we don't even have a cereal on our mission field. Well, we had cereal, but it got so infested by bugs we had to pick them out, you know. And yeah, we had 5 kids and we went to the mission field, but they got abducted by natives. And, you know, and you hear these stories, and some families think, I wish my kids would get abducted by natives. And you hear these stories and you think, oh man, why would I ever want to do that? And sometimes all we hear are the horror stories. I could tell you horror stories. I could tell you horror stories. You'd hate the idea of ever thinking about going into evangelism. But you know what? I don't hate it. I love it. When God called me to preach, my first fear was getting up in front of people. USA Today one time did a survey, 10 top fears of man. Top 10 fears. The second highest ranked fear was death. Second. You know what was first? Public speaking. Most people would rather die than speak in public. And I was of that persuasion. So God called me to preach, and I remember I said, all right, Lord, I'll do whatever you want. Scared to death, you know. And the very first time I preached, I was a freshman in high school, and I loved it. I loved it. See, sometimes folks think, I could never stand living in a foreign country. How do you know? Have you been to one? No, but I couldn't stand it. Well, how do you know? Well, I could never stand having to learn another language, or I would never. You don't know until you surrender. And look at Psalm 37. I mentioned verse 4 earlier. Delight thyself also in the Lord. That is to make him your soul's delight. You're enamored with him. You know the French term en amour, enamor. That's where we get our word enamored. It's in love with. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy way unto the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Pastor and I were talking today about how a lot of music just focuses on me, what makes me happy. You know, man, I can't wait to go to heaven and walk on the street of gold and live in a mansion and, you know, me, what I get. We're not going to be caring about that. We will for once and for all be enamored with Jesus Christ. And what this, I believe, is implying here, when you delight in him and he gives you the desires of your heart, some people think like, well, man, if I serve God, like maybe I finally win the big lottery check, right? No. Well, it says if you delight in him, he'll give you the desires of your heart. Well, I really believe 2 things come into play here. One, he will change desires that are flesh-driven. I had a lust for rock music, but when I began to delight in the Lord, he changed a flesh-driven desire. But also, he will fulfill desires that are God-given. God will fulfill desires that are God-given. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Let God make the choices. Let God make the call. Drop down context here, verse 23, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. Who delights in his way? Well, I'll give you a hint. Verse 24 says, though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down. Well, it isn't God who's going to fall. It's the good man who may get tripped up. Well, you know, the same verse as before is saying that good man will delight in the way God leads him. Here's the final principle. God gives his best to those who leave the choice with him. God gives his best to those who leave the choice with him. I cannot imagine Rich Tozour being anything but a preacher. And not just a preacher, an evangelist. My home church asked me if I would consider being the pastor. I said, no. Why not? Because I'd ruin this place. That's not my gift. I would never want to hurt my home church. But sum it up, one night my pastor of 22 years at our church was coming up to our trailer, and he and his wife were talking as they walked up, and they said, you know, I feel so bad for Rich and Angela. These poor people, every week they have to move somewhere else and drag that trailer around the country. No kidding. At the same time, we saw them coming up, and I said to Angela, you know, I feel so bad for Pastor. I said, he's got to listen to the same people week in and week out, all their problems and all the burdens. And we sat down at supper, and my pastor said, you know what we were talking about on the way up? And he told me, and I said, you know what we were talking about? How bad we feel for you. You know, I feel bad for Toby Whitmer. I really do. I mean, he's got to deal with you all the time. He said, oh, what do you know about us? I just know people. Now, you say, well, are people that bad? No. God has called us to minister to each other. He's got a call to minister, and he loves it. Me, I'd go crazy if I didn't travel. You know, I'm home for about a month, and I'm ready to go. All right, where are we going next? When God called me to preach, I was scared to death that I would never get to travel because I thought preachers don't have time or money to travel. Well, I get paid to travel. And it's funny. I look back now, and in under half a century, I've been to every state in the country, 50 states. I've been to Hawaii 14 times. Don't you love me? Been to Hawaii 14 times, and this past trip to Hawaii was my 10th consecutive. And usually we spend a month when we're out in Hawaii. I didn't seek that out. I just had churches invite us to come out. And, you know, this last time we went night diving, 5 different occasions after church at night. Master diver from the Navy would take us out, and we'd go night diving and flashlights. And I was kind of scared of night diving. I want to see what's going to eat me. But we went night diving, and man, saw incredible creatures. I've been lobster fishing up in Nova Scotia. I've climbed 10 of the 55 14-foot peaks out in Colorado. Hiked the Grand Canyon down and out twice already. And my favorite place, I think, in the country is Yosemite National Park. I've been there at least 15 times. Hiked Half Dome there 10 times. I love to hike, and well, I'll get asked to go on these retreats, and either with Christian schools or men's outing. And you know, I never signed up for what I'm doing because of all the perks. But it's amazing. I'm telling you this tonight because I used to think it would be awful to be a preacher. I'd be so limited. I love what I do. And it's not just because I've been to 46 countries and territories around the world and had all kinds of opportunities. Because every night I work with 2 things that count for eternity: the Word of God and the souls of people. That's what really matters. And young people, let me tell you, Jesus said if you save your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life for His sake, you'll find it. So often we just don't want to, no, if I surrender to God, I'm going to be miserable. Just the opposite is true. God gives His best to those who leave the choice with Him. You got nothing to lose and everything to gain if you'll just give back to God what is rightfully His. You belong to God. These are truths from a testimony of total transformation. This book changed my life, and it'll change your life. Incidentally, every key principle I shared with you the last 2 nights, I came to that conclusion by the time I was 15 years old. Teenagers, you're making some essential decisions in your life right now. And my coach used to tell us, Mr. Ham, the one I was telling you about, he used to say, every decision you make will affect the next decision you make. Every decision you make affects the next decision that you make. Remember this, you will be what you are becoming. You will be what you are becoming. What kind of parent will you be someday? What kind of spouse will you be? Tell me what you're becoming now. That's what you're going to be. You will be what you are becoming. By the grace of God, let's be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Would you stand with me as we bow before Him tonight?